Essentially, my background is as a zoo veterinarian, and as a zoo veterinarian, you're used to working with lots of different animals, different species of animals, and the average veterinarian isn't. So I came up to Virginia, to the Valley, to teach at Blue Ridge Community College in veterinary technology, which is, in fact, is where I met Nancy Sheffield, who's now Ed's wife. And people found out that I knew something about animals other than dogs and cats and horses and cows. And as a result, I used to get a lot of calls about exotic pets and also wildlife that would get into trouble. And the more I did, the more people wanted me to do. And it got to the point where at the community college where I teach, we started to get overwhelmed with animals, people bringing in owls and hawks and bunnies and stuff like that that needed veterinary attention, and I really couldn't find any place to send them for the, quote, rehabilitation. I didn't have sufficient housing for them. And on top of that, the president of the college was somewhat concerned about turning the community college into a home for wayward animals and was giving me a lot of grief about doing so. And Ed and Nancy came over one night to the house, and when I was telling them this story about the problems we were having at the college housing all these animals, and at the time I think it might have been 5 animals. I mean, it wasn't a huge number. And I was telling them about the lack of any type of facility for these animals, that the government agencies that are responsible really don't take that responsibility in terms of dealing with individual animals. And I said that, if I can get somebody who would do the fundraising and the political end of it, that I'd like to start a wildlife center. And I did not say that thinking I was going to start one at that point in time. But anyway, Ed got excited about it and said, well, why don't we just do it?
Well, every year we get literally hundreds of owls in, and in almost every case they're hit by automobiles. It's not because they are blinded by the lights, as the common wisdom suggests. It's because they hunt in the road, and they will sit in the trees at the edge of the road and wait for their prey to run out across the road, and then when they fly down to capture the mouse or shrew or whatever it happens to be, or in the case of a saw-whet owl like this one, could even be a large insect, they just don't pay attention to where they're going, and they fly out in front of cars just like children chasing a ball in the street might be vulnerable in that regard. This particular one has lost his left wing to the automobile collision and is now part of our education program. In this case, obviously with one wing, he'll never fly again. The wings and missing limbs do not regenerate. It's just as if we lose an arm as humans, they just don't grow back. And people sometimes don't see the correlation between human physiology and animal physiology. We get the question all the time, will that wing grow back? And it certainly will not. So he is permanently disabled from his injuries and can therefore never be returned to the wild. So he will stay with us here at the Wildlife Center and be used in our education program, and if for any reason his stay here is no longer needed, we would find a home for him in a nature center or a zoo.
Nancy's father, Carl Sheffield, said we could use his barn in Waynesboro, and I had the medical facilities over at the college, were okay to use. I just didn't have housing. And the first year we were in operation, which was in 1983, we saw 200 and some animals. And of course, the more we saw, the more people wanted us to see. And 1989 we saw 1,316 animals. In 1990 we're well ahead of that. We're 200 animals ahead of last year. So obviously there was a need out there for a place to deal with this problem, because it is obviously a big problem. We're a rural facility here, and we get animals from all over the state. I mean, we got animals this weekend from Northern Virginia. We got animals from Virginia Beach. We get animals from Danville. I mean, there's just no other place to take these animals.
A little deer fawn that apparently has just come in. In fact, came in just this morning. This is our case number 697. And this little fawn, just looking from the size of him, is probably not more than about 4 days old. Probably weighs about 3.5 pounds, and if that. And I'm sure with this little fawn, as with most of the cases that we see in orphaned animals, there's nothing really wrong with him, and there really is no reason for him to be in captivity. This little animal, like so many others, is frequently left by its mother for a large portion of the day while the mothers go off to feed or find water. And people come along, well-intentioned people, but poorly informed people, and find these little animals and assume that if the mother were well, that she would be there doing mother stuff, you know, knitting hoof booties or some other appropriate maternal activity. But in nature, it's not only normal, but it's absolutely necessary for the adult animals to leave the young unattended for significant portions of the day. So people find them, immediately assume something's wrong, and pick the fawns up and take them home.
It's not just the deer fawns or the hawks. It's possums. It's rabbits. We've had people bring us possums from Lynchburg. We've had people bring us rabbits from Roanoke. I don't know that that's necessarily the best thing for the animal, but again, it gets back to no other place to take them, and you sit there and tell somebody over the phone what's involved with taking care of one of these animals. They're not equipped to do it. They're working 2 jobs. They're two income families, and they just don't have the time for it. So and they are interested. They do call back. I mean, we get, I would say, 10, 15 phone calls a day from people who have brought us animals to find out what's going on, how is it, etc., etc. And many of these calls are long distance. So there is just a tremendous interest in the individual animals.
This is our lab. It's small and cramped, as you can see. Linda's a veterinary technology student at Blue Ridge Community College and is here on a summer internship. And she's working on a blood sample from one of our patients to give us a profile of the animal's overall condition. And we have the capability, even in our cramped quarters here, to do some rather sophisticated diagnostics. We do all of our own blood analysis, urinalysis, fecal analysis. We even have the capability to screen blood for certain enzymes that indicate the presence of pesticide poisoning. And that gives us a pretty good handle on the overall physical condition of an animal, gives us an idea whether or not the animal has an infection, as an example, an anemia, things that might indicate other problems that wouldn't show up in the gross examination that they get when they come in or on x-rays. And it gives us an idea that if there are problems that surface in the types of laboratory work we're able to do, we can then send out a blood sample for a more complete profile that will give us specific organ functions and let us know if the liver and the kidneys are doing their thing as appropriate. And really, we can zero in on just about anything that's wrong with the animals that come in the door. Only rarely do we encounter problems that we're not able to diagnose here, or at least narrow down here, so that the diagnosis becomes easier.
One of the things that I've learned in this business is that the wild animals that get brought in here are essentially sentinels of the environment, canaries in the coal mine, if you will. And by looking carefully at what we're finding in these animals, sometimes they may tell us about problems out in the environment. And I guess the best example is the pesticide poisoning that we've found in the eagles and in the hawks and in the owls. These animals, being end-stage predators, accumulate poisons from smaller animals that they happen to eat. And what we're finding out, or what we have found out, is many of the chemicals that we're using around our homes and in our fields and on our farms are very, very toxic to birds. And some of these things are unsafe in the environment, and the Environmental Protection Agency has sort of not been as vigilant as they should be in terms of protecting the environment, as opposed to just looking out for human problems.
Well, right now, we are seeing about 400 to 500 birds of prey a year, and fully 20% of the animals that we see, or of the birds of prey that we see, show symptoms of pesticide poisoning. So 1 in 5 has been exposed from our indications. And that's an alarming rate. And in some cases, we are successful in identifying even which pesticide is responsible, but unfortunately, in only a few of the cases are we able to identify the source of the poison.
Once we got over here and we had a facility, we started to be approached by veterinary students that wanted to come up here and get some experience working in this field. And in 1986, we took our first veterinary student from Virginia Tech, a senior veterinary student, to come up on what we call an externship. And just the demand has been incredible. That year, we took 2 veterinary students in 1986. 1987, I think we took 7. This year I think we're going to have 18 veterinary students through here. The demand is just incredible from schools across the country. Florida, Pennsylvania, of course most of our students come from Virginia. I just scheduled a veterinary student last week from Minnesota. They're just not getting this type of exposure in the schools, and their students are interested in wildlife. So that's been an area that's really taken off.
What we're working on here is a deer fawn. This is Dr. Flo Singh, who's our new associate veterinarian, who's here on a one-year internship from New York. Dr. Singh has been practicing in small animal practice for 8 years and has, for some unknown reason, decided to go into wildlife medicine. And Sarah Sneed is our veterinary technician and hospital manager. And the little fawn that they're holding here is a fawn that had been attacked by a dog, and a couple just happened to be taking a walk in the woods and saw the dog attack the fawn, and they brought it into us. And Flo, why don't you take it from there and tell us what you're going to do here?
Okay, great. This fawn actually came in yesterday, and on initial evaluation she was very shocky. We got an intravenous catheter established and got her stabilized, and then took her to surgery where we repaired a fractured leg bone. Right now I'm just going to do a follow-up physical and make sure that everything is going as planned. I want to clean up some of the cuts. She's already had some antibiotics this morning. So I'm going to start at the head, and I usually just start up here, feel the lymph nodes, make sure they feel fine.
We decided very early on that if we were going to be doing this, we did not want to throw any barriers up in the way of the people bringing us animals. So essentially we said two things. One, that we would take anything, any native wild animal except skunks and raccoons, and that's because of the tremendous rabies problem we're having in Virginia. We will take skunks and raccoons, but we take them telling the people that they will be humanely put to sleep and they will be tested for rabies. And the other thing was that we weren't going to charge. So we take the animals at no charge to the people and do what we can to get the animals back in the wild. Essentially that's what we're trying to do, is to get the animals back in the wild. Some species cannot be returned to the wild, and then you have to make decisions there. But we did not want to interfere with the animal's right to live based on somebody's financial ability to pay.
This is our surgery, where our professional veterinary staff does the sophisticated reconstruction or corrective surgeries that go on. Most of the surgery that does take place is to repair trauma or to do orthopedic corrections, fixing broken legs, broken wings, things of this nature. We frequently have to invent the equipment that we need to perform the surgery. Now, there's certain basics, such as our anesthesia machine, which is really state-of-the-art, and we do use an anesthesia that's primarily designed for humans called isoflurane.
Drugs and supplies, feed, animal feed, raising deer fawns is very expensive. Caring for deer fawns with fractures, we put casts on their legs. The casting material costs $2–3 a raw, and you have to change the cast once a week. The anesthetic that we use, isoflurane, is the same product they use in people. It's $55 a bottle, and that's for 100 cc's of drug, which is 3 1/3 ounces, which isn't very much. So it gets very expensive. The new facility essentially is going to be a full-service hospital and research facility for wildlife. The research part, we've done some research here at the Wildlife Center of Virginia, because there are so many of the things we're seeing nobody else has seen before, nobody else has reported, and there's so many problems out there that we would like to be able to explore, or to explore more fully. But to have a full-service hospital that we could use for teaching as well, so that we can maybe expand our veterinary student program and maybe take 2 students at a time, so that we'd have some elbow room, so that we would be able to have more than one room to put all your animals in, so that somebody bringing an animal in doesn't walk into your animal holding area. A lot of what we've done here, in theory, is probably not the best way to do it in terms of management, but because of our limitations, both financial and structural, we've had to deal with it, and it would be nice to sort of progressed to state of the art, since what we are doing is so unique, and since we seem to be doing more than anybody else in the country. It would be nice to have a facility that exhibits this.
Well, the raising money for the new facility is going to be quite an undertaking. As a matter of fact, the enormity of the project is somewhat overwhelming. The Board of Directors historically has functioned as a group of people who have tried to form the long-term policies of the function of the environment, of the Wildlife Center. One of the things that we have done and spent a lot of time on is the fundraising for operational purposes, which we have been doing since the inception of the Wildlife Center, and that's through grants, personal contributions, and the annual benefit that we do generally at Wintergreen. Through the years, through the last several years, we have been able to, in fact, focus on the real function of the Wildlife Center, what are its long-term goals, where we'd like to be in 10 years, all those things that elude you initially when you're just trying to make enough money to operate. Fortunately or unfortunately, coming out of that was the new Wildlife Center plan, which is, in my opinion, certainly not overly aggressive in any way as far as what's needed, as far as what has been planned. But it certainly is very aggressive dollar-wise, because we have never had to raise this kind of funds before. And this is going to be a challenge for all of us that we hope that we can meet, and we're certainly not sure that we can, but we're going to give it a shot. This would be the ultimate step for the establishment of us as a well-known environmental entity, and that this would give us a springboard in the future to get to a lot more people with an environmental message, and give us a lot more visibility in the state and the region, to let us into more people's environmental secret minds. And I think that when this new facility is established, we'll be able to reach a lot more people with the environmental education, which I think ultimately is the main function that we serve, the most important function that we serve. We'll have the ability to increase the scope of our educational facilities and the number of people we reach each year. And I feel that the education of children with an environmental message is probably the place that we can spend most of our where most money can be spent with the greatest positive potential impact to the environment, because the next generation is either going to make it or break it.